Welcome back, everybody, to another growth support conversation. My name is Neil, and today I'm joined by Brittany Ferguson to talk about uh, how would you put this? Cross-industry support. I love how you put it in your bio, where like the description of the meeting was transcending industries with support.
Yeah,
I love the way you put that. Do
thanks.
you want to, before we dive in and talk to them, do you want to give a brief intro to who you are?
Sure. So as you said, I'm Brittany Ferguson. I have more than 10 years kind of working in different variations of customer support, customer success, customer experience. So I've been in the industry for quite a while. And my primarily where I found myself working in really amazing companies are like the startup world and startup life. And I've been able to kind of dabble in so many different industries from SaaS, from fintech, from defense and e-commerce, health tech, healthcare. It's kind of been a pretty broad, like I said, it's just like transcending all different types of worlds and industries that has been really fun and fascinating for these past 10 years.
Nice. I think it's really great that you see a variety of different things. I mean, we always talk about maybe the different scale of companies, like, oh, we're going to start up or scale up, and the kind of journey that a company goes through. But jumping from industry to industry entirely is a whole different ball game, I would say.
Totally.
Do you have a favorite one before we totally dive into
Ooh.
it?
Um, I think like some of the ones where, and it's not one in particular, really, but I would say like the ones with a little bit more of a detailed into kind of security and privacy, those are fun for me because it feels like, oh, there's like some boundaries here of what we can and can't do, and creating and building policies to set up support teams within kind of creatively within certain types of restraints can be kind of fun, especially because I've worked, like you said, at startups that are in all different phases. So I work at pre-launch startups, ones that have some beta customers, and then some that are a little bit further along in the progress, and some that are a little bit more conceptual. So and also I'll also add that I've been at the end stages of a couple of different startups, but having something be like, oh, I don't, I know that there's boundaries here and I don't want to cross certain boundaries, like we can't legally. So how do we kind of meet up to it, and then what does that look like, and just kind of knowing that I know that I don't know a lot of things, and being able to kind of dig in and find out a lot more of where what all we need to have in place in order to be successful for our, the company, but also our customers that we serve.
I think thinking creatively within those restrictions is really cool. I mean, it gives you an opportunity to really push those boundaries. Not push the boundaries in sense of like the restrictions, but push the boundaries in terms of like creative solutioning and thinking about how to go about building that kind of gap, or like bridging the foundation a bit. You mentioned you work in a lot of startups. So is there something specific that attracts you to the smaller, like beginning stages of a company and organization?
So while I just said like learning those boundaries, what I like about startups is that there aren't hard and set boundaries, really.
They really have a lot of
But
freedom to play,
right,
play with.
right. Like I feel like I get an opportunity to kind of really sit there, carve my own, carve my own niche, figure like building things from the ground up is just one of the things that I really, really enjoy doing. I can't take what I've learned at one place and just plug and play the exact same thing and that, in whatever place that I go to next. So I can do certain things. I know I know like where there should be these little invisible lines of like, okay, we need this and we need this and we need this. But you need a help a ticketing center someplace or ticketing system. You also need, do you need phone support? Do you need chat? Do you need, or are you using Slack in this company and you're kind of setting things up in this way? There's just so many different tools that I've come across and they may, I know that something a similar type of system needs to exist in the new place that I go to, but also I may not have to use one of those things. Right now I'm doing some consulting work, and right, we don't have a ticketing system, which is kind of interesting. So that is like that's pretty fascinating for me to be like, oh, I can't just plug in and play something that I've done in the past.
So those wonderful reports that you're trying to get.
I know that, yeah, and that's kind of this is a fun stage at this place that I'm doing. It's a pre-launch, and there are certain elements that are like, okay, this just got stood up back in November, and we have like 2 or 3 customers right now, but we're kind of trying to find our niche and figure out what that looks like. But the systems in place are the ones that we are determining how it should work. So
Yeah.
love it.
Super cool. I mean, you get to really think creatively about it again, going back to those like processes and stuff. You mentioned like nothing is really plug and play when you go from these kind of different areas or environments to be able to go through. Like when you jump from healthcare and fintech or something into e-commerce or something like that, it's completely a different environment entirely about how you go about supporting those customers. Nothing is plug and play. But are there some things that you do really bring with you? I mean, you mentioned having that help desk, really being able to set up that ticketing system. What are those things that kind of do go across the industries that you kind of have that checklist in your board?
Yeah. So I think some of the things that kind of make it a little bit easier are having the exposure to Shopify, from working in some e-commerce before. So knowing how those systems work whenever I need to set things up for fintech, I know from the merchant side how things work. So if there's ever some kind of issue, a dispute that needs to be filed, I understand the process from the other point of view of what needs to happen. So then I know I need to build for that type of policy without having to do as much research, but knowing where to go to dig into those finer details to build out the other side of it. So it's like, I don't know, maybe like a Alice through the looking glass kind of way of being able to see that. So having an e-commerce experience, it's like flip side of that. Having health tech experience, and then flip side of that is like the policies and security that I would need in a fintech, and vice versa. Being able to see how to stand up, a company that is in health tech that is trying to get into direct to consumer market, got that covered, check that off the list. So there, with certain companies, the way that they're also kind of just selling their products and services, that there's so many different tiny little pieces that can go across for those different experiences. Having the background in defense, that was my first startup that I ever worked at, and I kind of did like a hybrid marketing role. That really set me up for a lot of opportunities, because it was like working with the government, having to work within certain types of restrictions, and then making sure that we had everything really honed in, buttoned down, cinched together, so that there was no possibility of any type of data security, information leaks. So that checks off the healthcare, the fintech, and there's just so many ways where you can kind of pull those little things and be like, oh, I've seen this before, just in a slightly different way.
It's always interesting because you have very specific nuances of those industries, right? When you work in them, you can be really, really good at one and have a very specific expertise in that thing. But if you are gathering this kind of, position switch where you're looking at it from a different angle or seeing the other side of the coin, you can have
Yeah.
a better understanding of how they operate and how to work with those organizations when you do need to partner with them. Because you might switch industry, right? But at the same time, you probably will interact with them in different ways or formats
Yes.
in some fashion or another.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, is there when you're transferring from one industry to another industry, is there something that you do first to try and learn those nuances of the new industry that you're going into?
Um, I won't say that there's like a specific formula for it. It's, kind of diving in, understanding a little bit about the product, and then for me, like I'm just a inherently curious person. So if you can't tell, a lot of the like kind of trans going through all of these different industries satiates that need of like, ooh, something fun, shiny, new. I don't know the full ins and outs of what this industry looks like, but I am incredibly hungry and curious to know more. So being able to kind of dive in, like knowing I don't know, I know that I don't know a lot of things. And so what are the things that I don't know that I would need to know? And I just sit there and kind of create a list of like, what, oh, this is interesting. What do I need to know about this? And does the company have a process for, X? Do we have are we have we used other HIPAA compliant tools? How are we talking with our customers today? Are there certain things that we need to think about from a security perspective? I don't like, again, why I like working in startups is I don't have to kind of stay in my lane pretty much. And that's kind of the agreed upon, like, hey, whenever I'm interviewing with someone, like, so what is like, how do decisions get made? And then also like if I see something, who do I go to about it if it doesn't have to do with support necessarily? Because a lot of things that support touches, it's going to be operations, it's going to be part of the product, it's going to be part of whatever engineering touches. We kind of touch into so many other different departments, and it's kind of hard to stay within the bounds of just like, oh, just support. We just kind of work in a silo here. It obviously doesn't work. So being able to communicate with other teams and departments and then coming in and saying like, hey, I see that we have certain things that we need to probably do. And the guidelines for, this industry, this is the path that we kind of need to follow. We need to stay within these bounds. So what else are we doing, or what other tools do we have that that we need to kind of be mindful of in order to make a system that fits that functionality and then also fits the criteria of whatever compliance that we need to make sure that we're adhering to. So I think it's like that's kind of fun for me. I don't know. Maybe it's
I
just
love
me.
I love the curiosity. I mean, no, I think like there's a couple of things you mentioned. One, having that really deep sense of asking questions, doing the discovery, like really trying to understand like where is it and how can I actually learn the new things. I mean, getting your hands on. I think support people are innately curious,
Yeah.
and even more so if they have something creative to build towards and actually work towards in that sense. You also mentioned that really being able to see, like, in a startup, you wear so many hats. I remember when I started here at AIHR, we were 8 people, and it was just like, okay, go do everything. And it's just you do get an opportunity to be able to, one, build those really early relationships, to really think about how the other departments interact, so you can actually work towards that common goal of getting the right processes and policies in place a bit early. We talked about a couple of things. One, kind of going through the different industries, but two, we also mentioned talking about working in startups quite a lot, of kind of that pre-seed and the early stage things as well. Is there kind of, I mean, you've been in an environment for quite a long time in startups. Is there a particular piece of advice that you would have for somebody who's never worked at a startup and is moving to work in one?
That's a really good question. The job that I actually had before working in a startup was for a nonprofit, and I think if there's any type of industry to work at, and an educational one at best, so I know what it's like to work in something that has very kind of tight like confinement for the rule of working. And this was my previous life working in marketing. Um, that it is just kind of like curiosity, asking a lot of questions, asking why certain things are done. And that, ask anybody why, coming from a curious point of view, which I know can rub people a little bit the wrong way in the non-startup environment. If you ask, like, why do we do things this way? Something that I was always told in that role was, because it's how we've always done it. And that was the, like, I can't handle this anymore. I can't have this be like a status quo. And just because this is how the system was built and you say that this is how it's done, if I see an area for improvement, I want to know, like, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we implement it? There's always also, like, just the fear of a failure. And I had to unlearn that moving into a startup environment. And it took, like, working in the first startup role that I had, which was the e-commerce company, and it was an in-person role. And every role that I've actually had ever since then has been remote. But having that first role and having the two founders be like, why don't you just try something and it's okay if it fails? And that was like a mind-blowing concept to me of, like, but if it fails, like, then that's, like, that looks bad. So it's kind of letting go of a lot of the things that you've probably held on to in some of those places. If you've kind of had a similar experience to what I had before, it's been, I guess that role was probably about 12 or 13 years ago, but still, like, it's kind of held on. It's held its chokehold on to me enough. But if you don't work in an environment like that, it just may be like kind of approaching things with curiosity, meeting with other different departments and teams, and just kind of knowing, like, what is it that you do that you really enjoy, and then what would you want to change in the company? And are there things that also you could touch as well that could help that other team improve process, or you could collaborate together. I think that working very closely with other teams and departments will be an enlightening experience to help you be better, and then also serve your customers better. I mean, that's also the ultimate goal as well.
I love all of that. You mentioned so much that I want to unpack. But like one of the things that you said, like in a startup environment, you're gonna fail. Like it's gonna happen. I love that you say you need to unlearn that kind of
Yeah.
feeling of trying to get over that sense of it's too risky, what's gonna happen. Like in a startup environment, there are so many things that I've built that just fell flat. That I'm like, okay, well, let's go again. Let's try something different. Let's fix it. I think we learned a bit of a decision making framework, which was is how much of a trapdoor decision is it versus how tunable is it, and how critically important is it. If it's not important and it's tunable, go for it. Like it's not gonna, you can change it, you can, it's low impact, this kind of a thing. And then you have this framework of like who you need to involve and when. If it's really important and it's a trapdoor decision, then everybody needs to be on board. If it's
Right.
tunable, like just do the double checks real quick, try some things out. I moved from a large retail sales into a startup, very different. And I actually
Yeah.
got asked this question yesterday, which was, what did you carry over from retail to what you're doing now? I had to sit there and I was like, I'm actually talking about this with Brittany tomorrow. This is gonna be super epic. Um, but one of the things was like, what I love so much about it is that when I was in retail, I was on the floor face to face with customers, where I had to call in for supports for people who were, in the call centers further away. And I always felt like a bit of the ant on the anthill of like, I can't
Mhm.
really do much for you here, but I can help you as much as I can. But I am just kind of a cog in the machine a little bit. Whereas in a startup, you own that experience. You get to be able to build that, and you have the chance to actually shape that. And I think that's the really interesting part of working in those small organizations, because you can take full ownership of that customer experience versus like the process will change in 6 months.
Right. But I'm sure, like, from your experience, you probably, it also sounds like you know what you don't want to bring over. And that's also just as important. And
That
like you said, you know, whenever you're kind of like feeling like the ant on the anthill, where you're just like, I'm just, you know, I'm just part of this process, and you know, that is the role that I am serving here. But it's, you then know what you want that experience to look like for that customer. So can you build out so that they don't feel like they're only talking to you know, a middle person that has their hands tied and can't do something. You can think about those, you know, the possibilities with a startup can be a little bit more endless. But there's, you know, you'll also kind of feel like if you do try something, sometimes you try it to fail to prove just that. Like I've had to do that before. And being told that of like, hey, we got to do something because this is what a board member is expecting us to do, but we all know it's not going to work, but we all just kind of have to do it to prove it. And I had to challenge something like that because I was like, well, what does success actually look like if this does work? Or how do we know when this fails
yeah,
if we're expecting it to fail? And just kind of creating like a marker and time and place for that, so that you have that safety net of like, all right, and now we're going back to the way things were, going back to the drawing board, and you can kind of pull things back. You have that flexibility. And as long as everybody else is, you know, especially leadership is in that understanding, then you truly, you're failing to fail a point, but you're not a failure. That's, I think, the one of the other things that I just want to just confirm out there for anybody is like, you are not a failure if you try something and it fails.
yeah.
And I think that is something that really stands out a little bit differently in the startup environment.
I I really find it important. Two things of working in startup environments. You need to be able to deal with ambiguity and change because it changes very quickly. And we don't know what the future will hold oftentimes.
Uh-huh.
To be able to deal with that quite well. And at the same time, what you mentioned about really validating those experiments, and it's not about you, right? It's
Yeah.
not necessarily you that fails. It's oftentimes you need to have those success criteria. I've been talking a lot with my team about, yeah, we want to set up initiatives, we want to set up these things. Like, we need to also just be able to let go of them if they don't work out, and if we invalidate
Right.
our own assumptions or our hypothesis, that's totally okay. That's also an answer. We know we tried something, we move on. It's all good. We'll try something new. And that's essentially the beauty of working in a smaller organization where you can do a lot of that as well, rather than every decision needs to be layers and layers and layers deep.
Yeah. And even just having like a very good file system, and having thing and documenting, and then just being like, okay, when we scrap these certain ideas and we no longer use them, you can put them away. I keep things for historical purposes because I know, I'm like, oh, that one thing was a really good idea, even though the whole rest of the picture wasn't ideal. Those little tiny ideas that are within, you know, that whatever has been created, the documentation, or maybe I've liked the phrase that I use for a response to a customer or something, but then we don't use, you know, we're not serving that service or product anymore. I still keep all of those because you can still learn from your past mistakes in that way. But also, it's like, I think it's just good to have certain things for a historical record. I've come into a lot of startups where I've asked, why don't we do things this way? And then had people say like, well, we tried it at one point in time, but I can't remember why it did or didn't work. But I didn't have the context to know how exactly it was implemented, if we were on this, if we were communicating the same things, if what I was saying was the identical or not. And there was just no documentation, no notes, no nothing about how it was done before. And you know, I would have kind of liked to have had a little bit more details in that. But then we, you know, trying something for my team that was kind of a similar implementation did work, but no one could remember what it was about the past thing that wasn't set. So it just kind of, you know, trying things out, testing them out, but keep that documentation. It may be helpful for historical context, But always go through, clean up your files, and just have like that archive folder that everything's just dumped
I've
in.
never deleted anything off of my Google
I
Drive.
I know people who go in and they're just like, I'm just gonna delete everything. It's like scorched earth kind of thing. And I'm like, I know I can't, like, I need to have something, because it's like you want to pull that back out and be like, oh yeah, let me take a look at that historical record of where we've also come from in the whole process of working at a startup.
Keeping the archives. I
Totally.
still have things from 5 years ago that I'm like, this is what our website used to look like. This is what it looks like today. Very different.
We were so cute back then. We were
Some of the
adorable.
things,
Yeah,
you
it's
look
just
at, you're
fun.
like, how did we even get to where we're at with stuff like that?
But I mean, I think that it also helps, like, in working like with some teams in health tech. I worked at a COVID testing company in 2020 to 2023, and how we used to do things. It was like, stand this company up, get tests out there, get these into the hands so that people can go back to work to keep life kind of moving. For like television industry, for Netflix, for Disney, um, for different manufacturing companies. Like, these were all, not the entertainment side, but everybody that we were testing before were essential workers who were trying to get back to work and be safe. And seeing how we did things in the past, even within like 3 months, it felt like 3 years. And then 6 months felt like 5 years. And we just say, do you remember whenever we used to do things this way? Whew, this is so great now. And you really appreciate the progress of being able to kind of see how things moved along. And you know what you don't want to do, someplace else, different industry, different time and place. Like, you learn from the things that you've done in the past, and whether you want to call them mistakes or not, like, I think it's just all the part of the growing process.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I have this thing about failure that is, if you do fail, if you learn something from it, you've still grown in that sense, because you have learned something from that failure. You didn't fail. You grew in that way. So I fully agree.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think I live by the same philosophy, so I agree.
Well, on the note of philosophies, I am curious if you have one throughout your professional career that you still stick to today that you've learned.
I think it is just kind of more of the being hungry, being curious, a dogged sense of curiosity, I would say. Um, I leave no stones unturned, and whenever I walk into a place, and I will be like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions, and I'm going to have a list. So my philosophy is just mostly like, coming in like an unboundless curiosity, really.
I love it. That's awesome. Like, you have to be able to do discovery and learn new things and be curious. I think that's a great mentality to have. And just also, you're open to new ideas as well. If you're asking questions, you're not necessarily locked into your one very specific viewpoint on anything, because you're curious to what those things could mean, uh,
Yeah,
which I think is
yeah,
great.
exactly.
Well, thank you, Brittany, for joining me for the conversation. I really appreciate it. And also just sharing your thoughts of working in a startup, and also different industries and what that means for people as well. If there are people who would like to connect with you, is there a best place to do that?
Yes, I'm in support driven, and I can't remember what my handle name is. I think it's bferg/Brittany. But you can search Brittany Ferguson and find me in there. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I can't remember what my name is on there either, but I think it's linkedin.com/ and it's probably Brittany D. Ferguson or Brittany Ferguson. But you'll be able to see my face on my image, and I'm sure that we have a mutual connection someplace too.
Lovely. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to speak with you today. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.